So I've been trying to get a ranged rogue build to work, and as you guys saw from the intro, the Rain of Arrows spec here that is sort of like a hybrid melee ranged build is something that I've kind of stumbled upon in my theory crafting, and I've actually really enjoyed it. Now, it's not as good as like the potential Trapper build, for example, or the Poison Imbuement single target burst, but this is a really good AoE spec, and actually the highest AoE damage spec that I've seen out of the rogue so far in terms of, using Rain of Arrows. Now, I am going to be working on full ranged build soon, but I wanted to show you all this one because it's super fun. Link to the build template down below. Let's dive into it. And if you enjoyed this video or any video on the channel, be sure to subscribe. Only 9% of you are, and it really does help out. So diving into the skills here, I really tried to go for full ranged Rain of Arrows, but the problem is that Rain of Arrows starts from you and goes onward. So if you're at ranged, you actually just miss a whole section of the AoE, which ends up being pretty bad. So our basic here is going to be puncture into fundamental puncture. This gives us guaranteed vulnerable on whatever target we wish, whenever we want it, which is very important against elites and bosses. Our core skill is going to be twisting blades. Now, this is something that might surprise some of you. The reason why we're using it is one, it allows us to be melee, so that allows us to get full value out of Rain of Arrows. And second, it actually has the ability to reduce our cooldowns. Now, you might say, oh, well, it's been nerfed. It doesn't reduce cooldowns by much at all. Yeah, it has been nerfed, and it has been hotfixed, where it's actually providing the 2-second potential cooldown reduction instead of like 6 or 7 seconds, which is actually a bug beforehand. But that doesn't mean that it's bad at all. In fact, this allows us to reduce a 60-second cooldown in Rain of Arrows, oftentimes to about 20 seconds, which is very powerful. Then we have a couple of other things associated with this build in terms of passives, which I'll go over later on. But our third skill here is going to be Shadow Step into Methodical Shadow Step. This allows us to give it a little bit of stun, as well as giving us crit strike chance against elites and bosses. But we're actually going to pick up Dash in our boots. So if you don't have a boot that gives you a rank of Dash, you might want to pick up Dash there, because I like the double mobility in general on the rogue. Coming down here, this is where it gets a little crazy. You might notice that we have upgraded all the imbuements, and that is because of a specific amulet that gives Rain of Arrows every single imbuement in the game attached to it. Now, we're not going to slot all 3 of these on the bar, but we put 1 point into it, and then we go ahead and try to pick up these later enhancements in order for us to get the value regardless. This is absolutely huge, okay? Because when we go ahead and actually pick up all 3 of these, we actually get a ton of different bonuses, okay? And it actually allows us to really amp up our overall value in terms of getting Rain of Arrows to do a lot of damage or a lot of bonuses. So we're gonna pick up Shadow Imbuement, Cold Imbuement. We're only gonna put 1 point and then pick up the various extra damage dealing and giving us a little bit extra non-physical damage. And then we put Poison Imbuement the rest of the points in order for us to ramp this up so that we can actually put it on our bar and get a little bit of extra single target damage. And then we're going to pick up a few different passives around here to ramp up all the different versions of these imbuements. And of course, Rain of Arrows is going to be our hallmark ability and giving us a ton of value here, okay? And Rain of Arrows is just a decent AoE with honestly kind of mediocre damage on a base amount, but with all the different multipliers and stuff that we're running, it actually ends up being quite good. We're also running Momentum here as our key passive. Why? Well, because we're going to always basically get the 3 stacks, get our damage reduction, get our energy regeneration, which is really important with our specialization, as we'll go over later on. So the passes here that you want to consider is Aftermath, getting a restoration of energy. I actually like Innervation in a second wind. The reason for this is we want to increase our lucky hit chance, and we want to get our energy on hit back, which is going to be very important for resetting our cooldown for Rain of Arrows. We have a few of the passives that are going to reduce our damage, or reduce our damage taken rather. In Debilitating Toxins, Deadly Venom, and Alchemical Advantage are going to give us a little bit of extra damage and attack speed. Precision Imbuement is going to give us a little bit of crit chance on our imbued skills. We actually do increased damage to frozen and chilled enemies from Frigid Finesse, which is going to be super nice with Cold Imbuement. We have Exploit, Weapon Malice, Weapon Mastery for extra damage, and then we have Sturdy and Siphoning Strikes. This is very important to keep us alive. That's going to be the skill breakdown. Let's dive into the aspects. So diving into the aspects here, I actually want to start off with the amulet. And the reason for this is what kind of sparked the interest of trying to make a Rain of Arrows build work. This amulet gives Rain of Arrows all imbuements at the same time when it's cast. It's always imbued, and it's always imbued with all of them, which is very powerful, which is also why we're investing points into them, okay? On top of that, it's going to give us a lot of value in terms of ultimate skill damage, extra imbuement skills. Overall, it's just a solid amulet, but it only really works with Rain of Arrows. Ring, we have Bursting Venoms. Anytime we hit with a poison imbued skill and we crit and then we lucky hit, we can actually stand in the pool that it spawns to get infinite poison imbuements, which is very powerful, especially with our specialization, which we'll talk about later. We have Arrow Storms here. This is going to give us a chance to spawn an Arrow Storm on a lucky hit chance. Now, normally, this slot would actually be Edgemaster, but because it's disabled right now, I'm actually using Arrow Storm, but Edgemaster is going to be a little bit better overall for higher DPS. We're running Accelerating Aspect here for extra attack speed with our crit strikes on core skills. We're running Conceited for additional damage when we have a barrier. It's going to be very, very nice with Temerity, which is our pants, which we'll go over in just a second. We're going to be running Twisting Blades on the crossbow for higher Twisting Blades damage. Now, there is an argument to be said about placing your Aspect of Corruption on your crossbow, because it gives our imbuement skills up to 40% potential potency, or increased potency, but if we double that, which is 80%. So that's actually really powerful, but I have not seen an Corruption Aspect have a high roll yet, so I have not done that. But if you happen to have a high roll Corruption, it's actually really nice to replace these two slots here and put the Corruption Aspect on the crossbow. Our boots are going to give us our Shadow Step and extra charge. That's going to be the Ravagers. Our pants are going to be Temerity. Temerity is going to be a huge way to survive, and is also part of the reason why I find ranged rogue builds to be very mediocre oftentimes, because Temerity is so strong, and the combos that work with Temerity oftentimes are things like close damage reduction or healing when we're close, and we can't use those when we're in range, which is why the Twisting Blades version of this build feels so much better. Then we have the Aspect of Might and the Aspect of Disobedience for increased armor and increased damage reduction, which is going to be pretty powerful there. That's going to be the aspects. Let's talk about the gems. Now, as for gems, it's going to be pretty much exactly the same as the previous rogue builds. We're going to be running rubies on our armor pieces, skulls in our amulets and rings, and then emeralds in our weapons. Now, I've had a couple of questions about why we run rubies in the armor pieces, and the main reason is we want high maximum life. Why is this? Because Temerity gives us a barrier based on our maximum life, and our skill here in Siphoning Strikes heals us based on our maximum life, which means that the higher HP we have, the more healing value we're getting, the bigger shield value we're getting, and the tankier that we are overall, which is very, very powerful. Now, you can run Topaz potentially if you're worried about getting one shot by CC. If you're hardcore, I generally would recommend potentially running this one if you're worried about CC and getting one shot. But if you're softcore, or generally, if you want to get more value out of Temerity, then you're going to want to run rubies. Skulls are just super powerful for the armor, in conjunction with the Disobedience aspect to give us scaling up armor, and it's going to work with the skulls. And then emeralds in the weapons are going to be important just for extra critical strike damage. It's one of the highest value pieces to upgrade our damage. And of course, we're always going to have people vulnerable due to our Paragon and our Puncture. Now, talk about stats real quick. There's a few stats here that are incredibly important. Crit strike chance, crit strike damage. Specifically, crit strike chance is going to be super important because remember, we heal after we crit on close enemies, and this does work with the Rain of Arrows. So that's going to be super impactful. In fact, crit strike damage with imbued is also very powerful because we're always going to have Rain of Arrows imbued, and we're very commonly going to have Twisting Blades imbued with poison imbuement. So that's going to be very, very powerful as well. Vulnerable damage is going to be super, super good because we're always going to have vulnerable up. And then, of course, down here, getting energy cost reduction and also cooldown reduction is going to be huge for resetting our Rain of Arrows and overall just having enough energy to spam out our Twisting Blades. After that, any sort of damage reduction or any sort of these stats that are going to give you damage versus crowd controlled, damage with Cutthroat, damage with Core, damage with Imbued, all those are going to be solid stats to go for as well. Now, to talk about specializations, this is a build where we're actually running preparation. So this one's interesting because a lot of people don't even know what this spec does. But essentially, whenever we cast our ultimate, we're going to reset our poison imbuement, dash, and shadow step cooldowns. And anytime we spend 100 energy, we're going to go ahead and reduce our Rain of Arrows cooldown by 4 seconds. This, in combination with the Twisting Blades cooldown reduction, allows us to cycle back to Rain of Arrows very quickly. And in fact, we can spam out our poison imbuement oftentimes by resetting that cooldown. So it's actually very, very powerful. You can run Inner Sight potentially if you're more focused on single target damage. And in fact, when you're fighting bosses, it's actually a good idea to swap over to Inner Sight. But when we're doing AoE clearing, I prefer Preparation. Paragon board, since I am level 99 now, I can actually show you the complete Paragon board essentially because I'm only missing like 1 or 2 Paragon points. But instead of diving into every single individual path, I want to focus in on the boards themselves and the glyphs and legendary nodes that I'm picking up. So the first glyph we have is going to be the Closer glyph. This is very, very important to just get the 10% reduced damage when wielding a melee weapon, because although Rain of Arrows works with a ranged weapon and it uses its ranged weapon, you actually will get more value because you're constantly spamming out Twisting Blades. So this is going to give you way more value, and you're probably going to have a melee weapon up about 98% of the time. The only time you have a ranged weapon is when you briefly cast Rain of Arrows, and we can actually kind of remove that cast animation, which I'll show you all in a little bit. Then we have the Exploit glyph. Anytime we damage an enemy for the first time, we're going to inflict vulnerable on them. This is huge for Rain of Arrows because we're going to inflict vulnerable and then get that vulnerable application that's going to benefit our Rain of Arrows, but it's also just going to be a really nice thing to clear out trash and giving us extra vulnerable damage. Our first legendary node we're going to pick up is No Witnesses. It's going to give us 30% increased damage on our Rain of Arrows and also give us 10% increased damage whenever we cast it, which is going to be very, very powerful for our Twisting Blades. Next board here, we're actually going to go for the Eldritch Bounty, and whenever we attack with an imbued skill, we gain 20% resistance and 20% increased damage for that imbuance element. Now, honestly, this one isn't as impressive. Like if I were just running one imbuement, this is not worth it. But because I'm going to get cold resistance, shadow resistance, and poison resistance, and then also give us increased damage for that element, it's actually going to be pretty nice and a little bit of a chunk of damage. And in fact, it's oftentimes better than a lot of the rare nodes that I could potentially have picked up. Next glyph, though, is going to be the Control glyph. We're going to deal 10% increased damage to chilled enemies or 20% increased damage to frozen enemies. This is going to be super big because our Rain of Arrows is always going to chill and potentially freeze enemies, which is really, really powerful. So we're always going to get this value whenever we're hitting elites or random mobs. The only time it doesn't work is on bosses. Next node is going to be the Efficacy glyph, which is going to give us imbuement skills have extra potency. This is one that I have not upgraded to 15, which means I did not get the increased radius, but it's going to give you a massive bonus to rare nodes, which is going to give us a little bit extra value, as well as just giving us increased potency for our imbuements, which is going to work with our ultimate. And lastly, arguably the most important glyph, along with Exploit, Combat. We're going to get extra critical strike damage on our core skills, and any time we critically strike with our skills, we're going to restore 12% of the energy cost, which is going to be a really, really important way to get extra energy in a way that's going to contribute to preparation, because we're going to spend it, get it back, and then able to spend it again. So this is very, very important with preparation, and overall just a massive DPS increase. We're also going to pick up Cheap Shot because we are going to be crowd controlling enemies with our Rain of Arrows, which is going to give us extra 25% potential damage. Now, Rain of Arrows is an interesting ability, and I want to show how it works before we dive into anything else and actually showcase the build in Nightmare Dungeons. But this is actually an area of effect rectangle that shoots out for about 20 meters, and it starts from where you cast it, and it also locks you in animation for about half a second, maybe just a second. And you could cancel this potentially depending on server lag in some scenarios with dash and shadow step and evade. But to show you what it looks like is I'll cast Rain of Arrows, and it starts basically right in front of me and shoots out for a decent chunk of area. This is mainly the reason why we want to run a melee build, because if you're hitting someone from over here with your ranged build, you're only going to get half, if not less than half, of the effectiveness of Rain of Arrows, which felt really bad to me. And so Twisting Blades was kind of that perfect thing that I wanted to run in order for us to get most value out of it. So I'm in a tier 41 Nightmare Dungeon here just to show you all, and I kind of did some of the early process so I could find out on a pack of elites here. But just to show you kind of what this looks like on a normal mob pack, you can see we just cast the Rain of Arrows and it absolutely annihilates and shreds everything in the area. And that's the key advantage of the Rain of Arrows build, and one of, if not the coolest looking things in the game, which is you cast it, you annihilate any pack of monsters that you see, as long as it's not necessarily a boss, although it does decent damage against bosses. So the basic premise of this build is to go through and find those big packs and use our Rain of Arrows on a sort of cyclical rotation where we cast it, we kill a pack, we wait for it to be up, or we use Twisting Blades to kind of recharge it, and then we cast it a second time. And here we go. I'm going to go ahead and try to hit this and try to spawn a couple of elites here. Can we get a couple of elites to spawn? I'm not quite sure. Looks like it's not going to. So let's see if we can find a bigger elite pack to test this on. But you can see how strong the build truly is when you start to level up. Tier 41s are honestly not even an issue at all. And our tankiness is extremely high. As you can see, I'm barely getting hit at all. Again, basically due to temerity, the disobedience aspect, and with all of that combined, along with actually rain of arrows used in group scenarios, we get a massive, massive shield. For example, here when I cast it, each individual crit, check this out, procs temerity, or procs rather siphoning strikes, which procs temerity's shield. And we get a massive shield just because of that. Now we have very high single target damage when we do proc poison imbuement, and then we have very, very good AoE damage from our rain of arrows. And you can see it actually resets reasonably quickly. So oftentimes the goal is go and target the champions with your poison imbuement Twisting Blades, use rain of arrows to delete an entire pack extremely quickly, and then move on to the next pack. And it looks extremely, extremely easy. But to be fair, I am extremely strong on the character right now. So, you know, when you're testing this, it might take you a little bit of time to make sure you get the stats and all that stuff rolling. And when you do, you will see a massive effectiveness out of this build. Again, the main bread and butter of this skill is just to annihilate massive groups, and it is extremely fun to do so. I definitely find that this build has been my absolute favorite out of any build I have built so far. Even though I find poison imbuement to be extremely fun, with just the straight up single trigger damage with the shadow clone. But with this, I still get the poison imbuement. I just get to have a little bit of AoE damage on top of it, which is extremely, extremely nice. So I'll go ahead and wrap this one up and kill off the dungeon, and we will go ahead and see how great Rain of Arrows is against bosses, which, spoiler, it's not amazing, but it is serviceable against single target damage. It doesn't really compare to things like poison imbuement, however, it does compare a little bit to the Trapper build, which doesn't really do great damage against single target as well. Keep in mind also, I haven't even finished off the build myself, and it's actually performing this well already. For example, I do not have the imbuement skill effects, have 20% increased potency. I have not 15'd my closer glyph. I also have not 15 my control glyph. So there's a lot of power to be had still in this build, and I am already easily crushing 41s. So I've done 50s, I've done 60s, I've even done 70s with this build, although those are significantly harder and I oftentimes die. But for those of you that are interested in a Rain of Arrows build, this is going to be the one that I recommend, and it will be extremely, extremely good, especially for farming, because if you're going through and you're deleting AoE packs of monsters, you're going to find that it is absolutely insane just to delete them all. As you saw in the Nightmare Dungeon, you could easily do the same against packs. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. I know that a lot of people want to use Rain of Arrows, and I know myself, I find Rain of Arrows to be one of the most engaging abilities in the game. I will have more builds coming out in the future, so be sure to subscribe, guys. I really would like to do a penetrating shot rogue build, because I find rapid fire and barrage just be kind of miserable. With that said, thanks for watching, and I'll see you all for the next one.